Independent editorial defense analysis focused on Australia's strategic environment.
For generations, Australian defense planning has been dominated by a singular geographic reality, the tyranny of distance. The sprawling archipelago to the north has effectively represented both a physical shield and a potential vector for coercion. Strategic orthodoxy viewed this vast chain of islands, stretching from Sumatra to West Papua, primarily as a buffer zone. A chaotic geopolitical screen separating the continent from the friction of major power competition in East Asia. However, the ratification of the 2026 Security Pact between Canberra and Jakarta suggests a fundamental inversion of this logic. Rather than viewing the archipelago as a passive barrier, Australian planners appear to be actively integrating Indonesian military infrastructure into a shared defensive ecosystem. This represents a transition from a strategy of denial to one of cooperative access. It attempts to resolve the northern vulnerability by embedding Australian logistical and sensing capabilities directly into the sovereign territory of a neighbor. A neighbor that has historically been viewed with a mixture of necessity and suspicion. The centerpiece of this arrangement is the expanded access regime, allowing Australian Defence Force assets to utilize facilities in Kalimantan, and East Java alters the operational calculus for the Royal Australian Air Force significantly. In a high-intensity conflict scenario, the tyranny of distance works against Australian power projection. Airframes such as the F-35A and the P-8A Poseidon rely heavily on aerial refueling to maintain station time in the South China Sea or the Sulu Sea. Access to Indonesian airfields for contingency refueling and non-combat logistics effectively extends the combat radius of Australian air power. It does so without the immediate requirement for additional tanker support. This transforms the northern geography from a logistical hurdle into a forward operating environment. Yet this operational advantage introduces a critical dependency. The reliance on foreign infrastructure subjects Australian force generation to the political volatility of Jakarta. It creates a scenario where the availability of these forward nodes is contingent on Indonesian neutrality or alignment during a crisis. A variable that remains outside the control of Australian Strategic Command. Beyond the kinetic aspects of base access, the pact signals a sophisticated attempt to integrate industrial bases. It acts as a hedge against supply chain fragility. The Memorandum of Understanding regarding the co-production of 155mm artillery ammunition and propellants between Thales, Australia, and Pindad addresses a glaring deficiency. Domestic manufacturing capacity in Australia has long struggled to meet the volume requirements of modern attrition warfare. By offshoring a component of this supply chain to Indonesia, Canberra is effectively diversifying its production risk. Simultaneously, it anchors the Indonesian defense industry to Western standards and specifications. This industrial tethering creates a reciprocal vulnerability. While it boosts supply volume, it places a critical node of the logistical tail within a jurisdiction that maintains a steadfast policy of non-alignment. Defense planners appear to have calculated that the risk of supply disruption from Jakarta is lower than the risk of running out of munitions during a protracted engagement. The transfer of 25 upgraded Bushmaster protected mobility vehicles and the potential integration of CEA Technologies radars further illustrate this strategy of technological entanglement. These are not merely transactional exports, they are structural commitments to interoperability. When a partner nation adopts a specific platform like the Bushmaster, they inevitably adopt the doctrine, maintenance cycles, and training regimens associated with it. This creates a soft power influence within the Indonesian military establishment that transcends political cycles. More critically, The introduction of Australian radar technology potentially serves to close the radar gap across the northern approaches. If these systems can be integrated to share data, it would provide the Australian Defence Force with a common operating picture extending well beyond the horizon of the Jindalee operational radar network. However, this level of sensor fusion introduces acute information security risks. Sharing high-fidelity track data with a partner that operates a mix of Western, Russian, and potentially Chinese hardware creates a porous environment for signal intelligence. The challenge for Australian cyber warfare groups will be to sanitize this data exchange without degrading its tactical utility. Financial commitments underpin these structural changes. The elevation of the Karis Woomera exercise budget to 150 million Australian dollars annually does more than pay for fuel and rations. It signals a move toward institutionalized, high-end warfighting integration. The scale of this expenditure, occurring alongside the pressures of the AUKUS nuclear submarine acquisition, indicates that the Department of Defense views the northern near abroad as an immediate theater of operations. It suggests a prioritization of near-term conventional deterrence over longer-term exquisite capabilities. The sheer size of the exercise now requires a permanent administrative and logistical footprint. This forces the Australian Defence Force to maintain a higher state of readiness for deployment to the north. Such operational tempo places additional strain on a force structure already struggling with recruitment and retention. The geopolitical dimension of the pact reveals a tacit trade-off regarding the AUKUS program. For years, Jakarta expressed vocal concern regarding Australian plans to acquire nuclear-powered submarines. The muted response from Jakarta in 2026, juxtaposed with the acceptance of Australian surveillance data sharing, suggests a diplomatic transaction has occurred. Australia appears to have traded a degree of sovereignty over its intelligence products for Indonesian acquiescence to its strategic modernization. By providing the Indonesian military with high-quality maritime domain awareness data, Australia helps Jakarta enforce its own sovereignty against encroachment in the Natuna Sea. In doing so, Canberra aligns the security interests of the two nations against a common, albeit unnamed, external pressure. This alignment is fragile and purely pragmatic. It does not imply that Indonesia has abandoned its non-aligned status. Rather, it implies they have recognized the utility of Australian military power as a counterweight in the regional balance. Ultimately, the 2026 Pact represents a complex systems integration challenge disguised as a diplomatic victory. It attempts to resolve the historical vulnerability of the northern approaches not by building a higher wall, but by extending the perimeter into the territory of a neighbor. This approach assumes that economic and military interdependence can override divergent political trajectories. The 200 million Australian dollars aid package and the shared industrial projects are designed to increase the cost of decoupling for Jakarta. Yet the fundamental strategic divergence remains. Australia acts as a U.S. treaty ally with clear alliance obligations. Indonesia remains fiercely independent. The friction between these two strategic identities cannot be erased by joint exercises or shared radar data. The resulting security architecture is a hybrid system. Stronger in its reach and sensing capabilities, but structurally brittle due to its reliance on political convergence. Canberra has not so much neutralized the northern threat as it has decided to manage it through a system of mutual liability, accepting the risk of entanglement to secure the necessity of access.